I think what was lost was our normalcy. It was like our normal lives. I think that at one point, I remember sometime in early April, I kind of forgot what it was even like to be in the operating room. And in some ways, it seemed like the whole world had changed. And after doing this for almost 6 weeks, the normal life that from before became, now I had a new normal. It was being an intensive care doctor. We had a choice to make as a neurosurgeon. This is not, pulmonary disease and critical care medicine is not our subspecialty. But we train intensive care management, and we knew that we could be of value in taking care of sick patients, whether it's a neurological or a pulmonary one. I think some of the lost communication in America now is this lack of understanding of the importance of you're taking care of one another, and you're making an effort individually to do what's best for you. It may not be best for yourself per se, but it's what's best for the group of people or a population of people at risk.
The kind of thing that I look back on the most it was the unknown. There was so much unknown and a lot of fear. It's always been a very fine line between needing to stay open and needing to operate to make ends meet and not fall in too deep of a hole, and balancing public health. We see ourselves as a community business. We serve this neighborhood. I remember having this feeling going back and forth all the time. What is the right thing to do for our customers? Is it to be open for them and to provide them the service, or to close for their safety?
As a person of faith, I think that is important for all who consider themselves to be followers of the Carpenter, to mourn that we have lost our capacity as a collective nation to recognize and honor the humanity of every child of God in this world. And I think that when we lose our capacity to do that collectively, then there is definitely a need for mourning.
The last 6 months have been incredibly difficult for a variety of different reasons. In the last 6 months, we have experienced a pandemic like one we've never experienced in more than a generation. We have experienced ongoing murders of Black folks in this nation. It's also in the context of a really difficult election year for all kinds of races down the ballot. There's just so much writing on this election for so many different marginalized communities of color, women, trans folks, and people who are gender nonconforming and non-binary, people who use drugs, people who are homeless, people living with and impacted by HIV and AIDS, immigrants, people who are disabled, and on and on.
We need to mourn the deliberate attacks on our elections. The dissemination of misinformation and disinformation deliberately spread to frighten people and to discourage them from voting. This is immoral and it is un-American. And we need everyone to know that they can cast a safe and secure ballot by mail, by voting early in person, or by voting on election day, and mourn a situation where people feel that the only way that they can win an election is to try and discourage people from voting.
One of the things we most need to mourn is the lack of trust that's permeating our entire system. And it's being stoked from the top on down. When you have crises like these that are happening at the same time, you need trust in your leadership. And the fact that we don't have that is really causing a lot of concerns. And so we need to mourn that, but we also need to come together to bring in new leadership who we can trust and who's going to help try to bring us together and reunite that trust going forward. Around that time, I read a quote about a Margaret Mead, who was asked at one point when she thought that the first sign of civilization was, in her opinion, was finding a healed femoral fracture, a broken leg. If you're in a true civilized society and civilization, a healed femur it means that someone
protected you, bound you up, carried you, fed you, got you to health. And that ultimately civilization started when healing began, and that we're at our best when we serve others.
The pastry shop has always been a place where strangers can be in proximity without fear, and with a sense of security and a sense of openness. It's incredibly important in times of crisis to have a sense of trust in strangers. I mourn that that has been taken away because it leads to misunderstandings and to divisiveness and to fissures in the neighborhood and community that we need to support us and that we need to support. I always understood that that was a privilege, that sense of security in the world. Since the protests that were sparked by the murder of George Floyd, I understand even more, and I think it's been made abundantly clear just how great of a privilege that was to live with a sense of safety and security. So many members of our community have been standing up to tell us that they do not live with that sense of security. As we move out of this, as we grow and move forward, that privilege cannot be unique to any class, race, gender. It has to be accessible to everybody in our neighborhoods and everybody in our communities. We have to build that sense of security back.
I'm Patrick Malloy. I'm the subdean of the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in New York City, and that's where I am tonight, inside of our great cathedral. There are people gathered with us tonight all over the United States, all online tonight, but next week, on the 19th of October, some of us will gather here at the cathedral to hold vigil together and to process into the streets of the city. We invite you to be with us online and, if possible, to be with us in person next week. Tonight there are faith communities, many faith communities present, and their leaders. And we're grateful for all of them, some of whose representatives will actually help to lead us in prayer tonight. But whether they will be visible or not, we know that we're all joined together in this great community. These have been difficult days, and there's a great deal to mourn right now. All the deaths from COVID, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the fact that no one was found guilty of the death of Breonna Taylor just weeks ago. Wildfires burn in the West. Our trust in science has died. People are living in the United States afraid for their lives simply because of the color of their skin, unsafe in the halls of government and on the streets of our great cities. There is a great deal to mourn. And there is reason for hope. But hope does not remove the need first to mourn, to sob and to grieve, and to, if necessary, shake our fists at the sky. Next week, we will concentrate on our hope and the unity that gives us hope. But tonight, we gather together to mourn. People are gathered tonight all over the United States, from California to Maine, from Seattle to Kenosha to West Palm. People are gathered. And so wherever you are and from whatever communities you come, we're all united tonight. There are people holding these sorts of vigils of all sorts. And we in particular tonight are part of the Mourning into Unity program, the Mourning into Unity movement, as many of you are who are with us tonight across the United States and perhaps around the world. And it's very good that we have come together.
I am the Reverend Peter Cook from the New York State Council of Churches. Please pray with me. O God, our comfort and our strength, our help in the midst of trouble and our hope in the midst of despair, We come before you weighed down by months of pain and years of struggle. Give us the courage to face the tragedies that overwhelm us and the wisdom to name them with their true names and strengthen the bonds between us, that we might hold one another in our grief, encourage one another in our hope, and support one another in our commitment to a world healed and made new. And let all the people say, Amen.
These words come to us from the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah, who grieved 2,600 years ago for what had become of his people. Hear the words of the prophet Jeremiah to his people and to us. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks among all her lovers, and she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. From daughter Zion has departed all her majesty. Her princes have become like stags that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers, in the days of her affliction and wandering, all the precious things that were hers in days of old. Here ends the reading.
It's been said that it's better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. It's a very old proverb, although some people say that it was coined, though they're wrong, by Eleanor Roosevelt, who knew this cathedral and who prayed here and whose husband was responsible in a very singular way for the building of this cathedral. And so tonight, we here at the cathedral believe that it is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. And we ask all of us gathered, both those gathered online and those gathered in person now, to light the candles that they have. And after you've lit the candle, hold it out and look into the eyes of other people with you, both there with you in person and those who are there with you online. And let's connect in our humanity. And let's remember that we now, as we leave here, will hold a candle against the darkness and a candle in memory of all those things and all of those people whom we mourn tonight. By lighting our candles in this time of pandemic, we mourn the dead we know and those we don't. The ones killed by racism, and the ones who died alone, held in their last minutes only by God. Even as we mourn the dead, we honor and pledge our unity with the living, with our country, our planet, and all of us here tonight, still here. Let's now call to mind all of the things and all of the people whom we grieve and mourn. Let's speak the names of the things. Let's speak the names of the people. And those of you who are joining us online, if you would type in the chat now, in the times of silence, all of the things and all of the people who rise up in your minds and in your heart. In silence, let us remember the darkest days of the COVID crisis. Let us remember our fear, our isolation, and our pain. Let us now speak aloud what those days were like, or type it into the chat. And let us all say, we remember and we mourn.
In silence, let us remember the people who suffered the ravages of the virus. First, let us remember those who suffered but lived. Let us call them to mind and name them out loud, or type them into the chat. And let us all say, we remember and we mourn.
In silence, let us remember the people who died, the people we knew and loved, and the people we didn't know but are our neighbors still. Let us call them to the mind and name them aloud, or type them into the chat. And let us all say, we remember and we mourn.
As we consider our responsibility as followers of the Carpenter to love and honor the humanity of all, let us especially remember the Black people who have died at the hands of those entrusted with protecting them. Speak their names or type them into the chat at this time. And let us all say, we remember and we mourn.
In silence, in our mind's eye, let us remember all the businesses that have closed, all the workers who are without income, all the people who struggle to support their families and even themselves. Let the images of the places and the people rise in our minds and in our hearts, and let us name them aloud or type them into the chat. And let us all say, we remember and we mourn.
In silence, let us be mindful of all the cracks in our democracy, all the threats to the American experiment. Let us especially be mindful of the ways the upcoming election is in peril, the ways our voting is being undermined. Let us speak aloud all that we see or hear in our hearts and minds, or type it into the chat. And let us all say, we remember and we mourn.
Shelter us beneath your wings, divine presence of the universe. Guard us from all harmful things. Keep us safe throughout the night until we wake with morning's light. Sustain us, heal us, strengthen us, lift us up, and give us hope for the tomorrows to come. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, words, and actions of our own lives contribute in some way to that happiness, to that healing, and to that freedom for all.